The steam whistle pierced the afternoon air as the westbound train pulled into the dusty station. Ellen Mitchell pressed her face to the window, clutching her worn leather suitcase with hands that trembled despite her best efforts to stay calm. The sign on the platform read, "Millfield," in faded white letters. Her heart sank. This wasn't right. She was supposed to arrive in Millbrook, not Millfield. Ellen stepped onto the wooden platform, her blue dress wrinkled from the long journey. The train conductor tipped his hat and called out, "End of the line, miss. Next train, east won't come for 3 days." Before she could explain the mistake, the train was already pulling away, leaving her standing alone with her single suitcase and the marriage contract tucked safely in her coat pocket. At 24 years old, Ellen had never felt more lost. She pulled out the carefully folded letter from Mr. James Whitmore, her intended husband. The address clearly stated Millbrook, Nebraska, but here she was 50 miles away in a town that looked like it had seen better days. The few buildings lining the main street appeared weathered and tired, much like Ellen herself after months of planning this desperate escape from her old life. A small voice interrupted her worried thoughts. "Lady, lady, are you the angel?" Ellen turned to see a little girl with tangled brown hair and tear-stained cheeks running toward her. The child couldn't have been more than 6 years old, wearing a faded yellow dress that had been mended several times. Her feet were dirty, and her eyes held a sadness far too deep for someone so young. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but I think you have me confused with someone else," Ellen said gently, kneeling down to the child's level. "What's your name?" "Sophie," the little girl whispered, then grabbed Ellen's hand with surprising strength. "Please don't leave. Daddy needs you. He's very sick, and Mrs. Henderson said God would send us an angel when we needed help the most. You came on the train, just like she said." Ellen's heart twisted at the desperation in the child's voice. She looked around the empty platform, hoping to see someone who might claim this lost little girl. "Sophie, where are your parents? Where do you live?" "Mama's in heaven with baby brother," Sophie said matter-of-factly, the way children do when they've accepted a painful truth. "Daddy's at home, but he's been sleeping a lot. He won't eat the soup I made, and I don't know what else to do." Fresh tears started rolling down her cheeks. "Please, lady, I prayed so hard for someone to help us." Ellen felt something break open in her chest. This wasn't part of her plan. She was supposed to marry Mr. Whitmore, settle into her new life, and finally have the security she'd been searching for since her brother died and left her with nothing. But looking into Sophie's pleading eyes, she couldn't just walk away. "All right," Ellen heard herself saying, "I'll come with you, but just for a little while, until we can figure out what to do." Sophie's face lit up like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. She grabbed Ellen's hand and started pulling her toward a dusty road that led away from town. "Our ranch isn't far. Daddy will be so happy to see you." As they walked, Sophie chattered about everything and nothing. She told Ellen about their chickens, about how her daddy used to teach her letters before he got sick, and about how lonely the house felt without her mama's singing. Ellen found herself drawn into the child's innocent trust, even as worry gnawed at her stomach. The ranch house came into view after a 20-minute walk. It had once been painted white, but now the boards were gray and weathered. The front porch sagged slightly, and several window shutters hung crooked on their hinges. The whole place had an air of neglect that spoke of someone trying their best but failing to keep up. "Daddy," Sophie called out as they approached the front door. "Daddy, the angel came, just like we prayed for." There was no answer from inside the house. Sophie's excitement faded, replaced by the worry that seemed too familiar on her young face. She pushed open the door and motioned for Ellen to follow. The interior was dim and stuffy. Ellen could see a kitchen table covered with dirty dishes, a cold fireplace filled with ash, and children's clothes scattered on chairs. The air smelled stale like sickness and neglect. In a corner, on a narrow bed, lay a man who looked to be in his early 30s. He was pale and thin, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of beard growth. "Daddy," Sophie whispered, approaching the bed carefully. "I brought help." The man's eyes fluttered open, and Ellen saw they were the same warm brown as his daughter's. He struggled to sit up, clearly weak and disoriented. When his gaze fell on Ellen, confusion replaced the exhaustion. "Sophie, who is this lady?" he asked, his voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. "This is the angel I told you about," Sophie said excitedly. "She came on the train, just like Mrs. Henderson said she would. She's going to help us." The man looked mortified. He tried to stand, swayed dangerously, and Ellen instinctively stepped forward to steady him. The moment her hands touched his shoulders, she felt the heat of fever burning through his shirt. "Sir, you need to lie back down," Ellen said firmly, using the same tone she'd used when caring for her dying brother. "You have a high fever." "I'm sorry, miss," he mumbled, allowing her to help him back onto the bed. "I don't know what Sophie told you, but we don't need charity. We're managing just fine." Even as he said it, Ellen could see they were anything but fine. This man was seriously ill, possibly dying, and his little girl was trying to take care of him with 6-year-old hands and a heart full of love, but no real knowledge of what to do. "My name is Ellen Mitchell," she said quietly, "and I think maybe I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The man studied her face for a long moment. "I'm Abraham Walsh. This is my daughter Sophie." He closed his eyes, exhausted by even this small conversation. "But miss, I can't pay you anything for help. We barely have enough to—" His words trailed off as consciousness started slipping away from him again. Sophie grabbed Ellen's hand tightly, her eyes wide with fear. "He does this a lot," Sophie whispered. "He gets hot and sleepy, and sometimes he doesn't wake up for a whole day. I'm scared he's going to go to heaven like Mama did." Ellen knelt down and pulled Sophie into a gentle hug. "Listen to me, sweetheart. I'm going to stay here tonight and help take care of your daddy, all right? We're going to get him better." As Sophie nodded against her shoulder, Ellen looked around the rundown house and at the sick man who clearly needed more help than he was willing to admit. She thought about Mr. Whitmore waiting for her in Millbrook, about the security and respectability that marriage would provide. But she also thought about Sophie's prayer for an angel and the strange feeling that maybe, just maybe, that train conductor had made exactly the right mistake. Abraham stirred restlessly on the bed, muttering words she couldn't understand. Ellen gently placed her hand on his forehead and felt her heart skip. His fever was dangerously high, and from the look of things, it had been that way for quite some time. "Sophie," she said softly, "I need you to help me get some cool water. Your daddy is very sick, and we need to work together to help him get better." As the little girl ran to fetch water, Ellen looked down at Abraham's pale face and made a decision that would change all their lives forever. Mr. Whitmore would have to wait. Right now, this family needed her more than anyone ever had. Ellen worked through the night, alternating between cooling Abraham's fever with damp cloths and trying to get small sips of water past his cracked lips. Sophie had finally fallen asleep curled up in a chair beside the bed, her small hand still clutching her father's fingers. As dawn light crept through the dusty windows, Abraham's eyes fluttered open with more clarity than Ellen had seen since her arrival. "You're still here," he said, his voice stronger but filled with embarrassment. He tried to sit up, but Ellen gently pressed him back down. "Your fever broke about an hour ago," she said quietly, not wanting to wake Sophie. "But you're still very weak. You need to rest." Abraham's face flushed red. It wasn't from the fever. "Miss Mitchell, I appreciate what you did, but I can't have a stranger taking care of me like this. It's not proper, and I don't want folks in town getting the wrong idea about you." Ellen studied his face, seeing the pride warring with genuine concern for her reputation. "Mr. Walsh, when was the last time you ate a full meal? When did you last have the strength to properly care for Sophie?" He looked away, unable to meet her eyes. "I've been managing." "No, you haven't," Ellen said firmly but kindly. "And that's not your fault. You're sick, probably have been for months. But Sophie needs you to get better, and right now, you need help to do that." She moved to the kitchen area and began sorting through the limited supplies. Most of the food was spoiled or nearly gone. A few potatoes sat sprouting in a basket, and there was some flour that looked like it had seen better days. Ellen had learned to make something from nothing during the hard years after her brother Thomas died, leaving her alone and penniless. Thomas had been everything to her after their parents died in a factory fire when Ellen was 16. He worked in the mines to support them both, always promising things would get better. But the mine took him too slowly, with the coughing sickness that ate away at his lungs. Ellen had spent 2 years watching him waste away, learning to nurse him through the bad days, to stretch a single chicken into a week's worth of meals, and to hide her own hunger so he could eat. When Thomas finally passed, Ellen was left with nothing but debts and the memories of how to care for someone who was dying. She tried working in the textile mill, but the wages were barely enough to afford a corner of a room in the worst part of town. When she saw the advertisement for mail-order brides, it seemed like her only chance for survival and respectability. But looking at Sophie's peaceful face and Abraham's grateful eyes, Ellen realized she hadn't just been running towards security in Millbrook. She'd been running from the emptiness of having no one who needed her. "Miss Mitchell," Abraham's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Please call me Ellen." "Ellen," he said carefully, as if testing how her name felt. "I need you to know something. I'm not just tired or run down. I have consumption. The doctor in town told me last winter that I probably wouldn't see another Christmas." Ellen's hands stilled over the potatoes she was peeling. She'd suspected as much from his symptoms, but hearing it confirmed made her heart ache. "How long have you been sick?" "Started with a cough about a year ago. Got worse after Sophie's mother died." Abraham's voice grew thick with emotion. "Sarah passed 2 winters ago, trying to birth our son. The baby didn't make it either. I think maybe I just didn't want to get better after that." "But you have Sophie," Ellen said softly. "I do." Abraham looked at his sleeping daughter with such love it made Ellen's chest tight. "She's the reason I've fought as long as I have. But Ellen, you need to understand what you're getting yourself into if you stay. I might get better for a while, but this sickness, it's going to win eventually." Ellen continued preparing the simple breakfast, her mind working through everything he'd told her. She understood loss, understood watching someone you love slip away despite all your efforts. But she also understood something else, the difference between existing and living. "Mr. Walsh?" "Abraham," she corrected herself. "My brother died of consumption 3 years ago. I know what it looks like, and I know how to help make the good days better and the bad days bearable." Abraham was quiet for a long moment. "Why would you want to do that for strangers?" Before Ellen could answer, Sophie stirred awake, immediately checking to make sure her father was still there and still breathing. When she saw him sitting up and talking to Ellen, her whole face lit up. "Daddy, you look better. Ellen, you did fix him." Abraham managed a weak smile for his daughter. "I'm feeling a little stronger, little bird. But Ellen needs to explain something to you." Sophie looked between the adults with sudden worry. "You're not leaving, are you, Ellen?" Ellen knelt down beside the little girl. "Sophie, I came here by mistake. I was supposed to go to a different town to meet a man I'm going to marry." Sophie's lower lip began to tremble. "But we need you. Daddy needs you." "I need you. I know, sweetheart. And I want to help. But the man I'm supposed to marry paid money for me to come. And there are laws about these things." "What kind of man?" Sophie asked with the directness of children. Ellen realized she didn't really know much about James Whitmore beyond his letters. He was a banker, owned property, seemed respectable. He'd answered her advertisement for marriage with a formal letter and a train ticket, but there had been something cold about his correspondence. Still, he represented security and social standing. "He's a businessman in Millbrook," Ellen said carefully. "He seems like a good man." Abraham was watching this exchange with growing concern. "Ellen, you don't have to sacrifice your future for us. Sophie and we've been managing." "No, you haven't," Sophie said with surprising firmness. "Daddy, you've been sick and I've been scared. Ellen makes everything better. She made you soup, and she sang to me last night when I had bad dreams. Ellen felt a warm flush at Sophie's words. She had sung softly to comfort the child, an old lullaby her own mother used to sing. It felt natural, right, in a way that writing formal letters to a stranger never had. A knock at the door interrupted the conversation. Ellen opened it to find a weathered man in a postal uniform holding an envelope. "Looking for a Miss Ellen Mitchell," he said, tipping his hat. "Telegram came in for you at the station." Ellen's hands shook as she opened the telegram. The message was brief and direct. "Ellen, stop, expect your arrival Millbrook today. Stop wedding arrangements. Maid, stop, do not delay. Stop, J. Whitmore." Sophie had crept close enough to see Ellen's worried expression. "What does it say?" "The man I'm supposed to marry is expecting me today," Ellen said quietly. "He's made wedding arrangements." Abraham struggled to his feet, swaying slightly but determined to stand. "Ellen, you have to go. You can't risk your reputation or your future for us." "But what if I don't want to go?" The words came out before Ellen could stop them. The silence in the room was heavy with possibility and danger. Sophie looked hopefully between the adults, while Abraham stared at Ellen with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Ellen," Abraham said finally, "you don't know what you're saying. I'm a dying man with a child to raise and a failing ranch. You're young and beautiful and deserve a real future with someone who can provide for you." "Maybe," Ellen said, folding the telegram carefully. "But maybe some things are more important than security." She looked around the humble cabin that somehow felt more like home than anywhere she'd been since her parents died. Sophie was watching her with such hope, and Abraham with such careful restraint, as if he was afraid to want something he couldn't have. Outside, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, and Ellen couldn't help but feel they were gathering around this little family too. Soon she would have to make a choice that would determine all their futures. But for now, she had breakfast to finish and a little girl to comfort and a man to help heal, even if that healing could only be temporary. The telegram crinkled in her pocket as she moved back to the stove, a reminder that the outside world wouldn't wait much longer for her decision. 3 days passed like a dream Ellen didn't want to wake up from. Abraham's strength returned slowly but steadily under her careful nursing. The color came back to his cheeks, and he was able to sit at the kitchen table for meals instead of being confined to bed. Sophie blossomed like a flower after rain, her laughter filling the house as she helped Ellen with cooking and cleaning. But Ellen knew their peaceful bubble couldn't last forever. On Thursday morning, she was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the thunder of horses approaching fast. Through the kitchen window, she saw Abraham tense up and move protectively toward Sophie. Ellen's stomach dropped as she recognized the expensive clothes and polished boots of the 3 men dismounting in their yard. The leader was a tall man with silver hair and cold blue eyes. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than most families saw in a year. Even from a distance, Ellen could feel his authority and displeasure radiating like heat from fire. "You must be Miss Ellen Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying the tone a man used to being obeyed. "I'm Mr. James Whitmore. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Ellen's hands trembled as she untied her apron. This was not how she had imagined meeting her intended husband. "Mr. Whitmore, I can't explain." "There's nothing to explain," Whitmore cut her off. "You missed your train connection. It happens. But I've arranged for a carriage to take you to Millbrook immediately. The wedding is scheduled for tomorrow morning." Sophie had appeared in the doorway, pressing close to Abraham's side. Her eyes were wide with fear as she looked between Ellen and the stern stranger. "Sir," Abraham said quietly, "Miss Mitchell has been helping my family through a difficult time. She's been nothing but proper and Christian in her conduct." Whitmore's cold gaze shifted to Abraham, taking in his thin frame and the pallor that still lingered from his illness. "I'm sure she has. But Miss Mitchell has legal obligations to fulfill. I paid for her passage, her clothes, and have invested considerable time and money in this arrangement. Mr. Whitmore, Ellen said, finding her voice, I need more time to... Time. Whitmore's eyebrows shot up. Miss Mitchell, you signed a contract. I have that contract with me, along with the receipt for your train ticket and the money I sent for your traveling expenses. In the eyes of the law, you're already committed to this marriage. Ellen felt the walls closing in around her. She had signed that contract when she was desperate and hungry, sleeping in a boarding house that smelled like cabbage and despair. It seemed like a lifeline then. Now it felt like a chain. Daddy, Sophie whispered, tugging on Abraham's shirt. Don't let them take Ellen away. Abraham's jaw tightened, but Ellen could see the helplessness in his eyes. What could a sick rancher do against a wealthy businessman and the law? Perhaps, Abraham said carefully, there could be some arrangement. If Miss Mitchell wishes to stay and help with my daughter's care, I could work out a way to repay you. Whitmore laughed, a sound sharp as breaking glass. Mr. Walsh, is it? Do you have any idea what I've invested in this woman? The train ticket alone cost more than you probably see in a month. And I have a reputation to maintain in Millbrook. I cannot have it said that James Whitmore's bride ran off with some invalid. The cruel word hit Abraham like a physical blow, and Ellen saw him flinch. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. That's enough, Ellen said, stepping forward with more courage than she felt. Mr. Whitmore, I understand your position, but I need you to understand mine. This family needed help, and I provided it. There's nothing improper about Christian charity. Christian charity? Whitmore's voice dripped with disdain. Miss Mitchell, look around you. This man is clearly dying, his ranch is falling apart, and he has a child to burden any woman foolish enough to get involved. I'm offering you security, respectability, and comfort. Don't throw your life away on a hopeless cause. My daddy's not hopeless. Sophie burst out, tears streaming down her face. Ellen made him better. She sings to me and teaches me letters and makes the best cornbread ever. Whitmore barely glanced at the child. Miss Mitchell, gather your things. We're leaving now. No, Ellen said quietly. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Whitmore's face darkened. I beg your pardon. I said no. Ellen's voice grew stronger. I'm not ready to leave. I need more time to think about this. There's nothing to think about. You have a legal obligation. Abraham stepped forward despite his weakness. Sir, if Miss Mitchell doesn't want to go with you right now, then she doesn't have to. This is still America, and no one can be forced into marriage against their will. Whitmore's companions moved closer, their hands resting near their gun belts. The threat was subtle but clear. Mr. Walsh, Whitmore said softly, I wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen to you or your establishment here. Accidents can occur so easily on isolated ranches. Ellen felt ice run through her veins. She looked at Sophie's terrified face and Abraham's tense posture as he tried to shield his daughter. You're threatening them, she said, hardly believing it. I'm simply pointing out realities, Whitmore replied smoothly. Miss Mitchell has a contract to honor. If she refuses, I'll have to seek legal remedies. And I'll also have to recover my losses. That might include seizing property to satisfy the debt. Abraham paled. Ellen realized with growing horror that Whitmore wasn't just talking about taking her away. He was threatening to destroy this family entirely. How much? Ellen asked. I beg your pardon? How much money are we talking about? For the train ticket and expenses. Whitmore smiled coldly. With interest and damages for the inconvenience, I'd say about $200. Abraham made a small sound of distress. Ellen knew that was probably more money than the ranch was worth. It might as well have been $2,000. I don't have that kind of money, Abraham said quietly. Of course you don't, Whitmore replied. Which is why Miss Mitchell will be coming with me now, and we can forget this unfortunate detour ever happened. Sophie had started crying in earnest now, and the sound tore at Ellen's heart. She looked around the modest home that had felt more welcoming in 3 days than anywhere she'd lived in years. She thought about Abraham's gentle hands and grateful eyes, about Sophie's trust and laughter, about the sense of purpose she'd found in caring for them. Then she thought about Whitmore's cold demands and veiled threats, about a marriage built on contracts rather than affection, about a life of security that would feel like a prison. "Mr. Whitmore," she said finally, "I'll make you a deal." His eyebrows rose. "You're hardly in a position to negotiate, Miss Mitchell." "Give me 1 week," Ellen said. "1 week to decide. If I choose to honor our agreement, I'll come to Millbrook willingly and we can proceed with the wedding. If I choose not to, I'll find a way to repay every penny you've spent." Whitmore studied her for a long moment. "And if you can't repay me?" Ellen lifted her chin. "Then I'll honor the contract." Abraham started to protest, but Ellen gave him a warning look. She was buying them time, even if she didn't know what they could do with it. "Very well," Whitmore said after a pause. 1 week. But Miss Mitchell, I want to be very clear. If you're not in Millbrook by next Thursday, I'll be back here with the sheriff and legal papers. And I won't be nearly so reasonable next time." He turned to go, then paused. "Oh, and Miss Mitchell, I'll be very careful about getting too attached to this situation. Consumption is a terrible way to die. It would be a shame for you to watch another loved one waste away." The words hit Ellen like a slap. How did he know about Thomas? After the men rode away, the three of them stood in the yard, holding each other and trying to process what had just happened. Sophie clung to Ellen's skirts while Abraham's arm circled both of them protectively. "Ellen," Abraham said quietly, "what have you done?" She looked up into his worried brown eyes and realized she had just promised something she had no idea how to deliver. $200 might as well be $2,000. But she had bought them a week, and sometimes a week was enough time for a miracle. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I couldn't let him take me away from you. Not yet." As storm clouds gathered overhead, matching the uncertainty in all their hearts, Ellen wondered if she had just saved their little family or doomed them all. The week passed too quickly. Ellen threw herself into caring for Abraham and Sophie, trying to ignore the approaching deadline. Abraham grew stronger each day, able to work in the barn and even fix some of the loose boards on the porch. Sophie learned to read simple words and helped Ellen plant a small garden behind the house. For brief moments, Ellen could almost forget about the storm heading their way. But on Wednesday evening, reality came crashing back. Sheriff Wade arrived at sunset, his badge gleaming in the lamplight. Behind him rode Whitmore and two other men Ellen didn't recognize. Her heart sank when she saw the official papers in the sheriff's hand. "Miss Mitchell," Sheriff Wade said apologetically, "I'm sorry about this, but I have legal documents here requiring your immediate return to fulfill your marriage contract with Mr. Whitmore." Abraham stepped onto the porch, Sophie hiding behind him. "Sheriff, surely Miss Mitchell has the right to choose who she marries?" "Normally, yes," the sheriff replied, clearly uncomfortable with his task. "But she signed a binding agreement and accepted payment. Mr. Whitmore has been more than patient." Whitmore smiled coldly. "Indeed I have. Miss Mitchell, your week is up. Time to honor your commitments." "I'm not going," Ellen said, her voice shaking but determined. "Then you'll be arrested for fraud," Whitmore said smoothly. "And Mr. Walsh here will lose his ranch when I collect on the debt you've created." Sophie started crying, clutching Abraham's leg. "Don't take Ellen away, please." The sheriff looked troubled. "Now hold on, Mr. Whitmore. The girl hasn't committed any crime. She's just changed her mind. She's stolen $200 from me," Whitmore snapped. "I want either my bride or my money. Since she clearly can't pay, she'll face the consequences." Abraham's jaw tightened. "Sheriff, what if I could raise the money?" "Abraham, no," Ellen said quickly. She knew he didn't have that kind of money. "With what?" Whitmore laughed harshly. "This place isn't worth $50. You're dying, Walsh. Stop pretending you can save anyone." "He's not dying," Sophie shouted suddenly, her small voice fierce with anger. "Ellen made him better. She loves us, and we love her and you can't make her go." The child's words hung in the air. Ellen felt her cheeks burn as Abraham's eyes met hers. They'd never spoken of love, but Sophie had seen what the adults were too scared to admit. "How touching," Whitmore said mockingly. "But love doesn't pay debts." "Sheriff, arrest her." Sheriff Wade hesitated. "Mr. Whitmore, I've known the Walsh family for years. Abraham's a good man, and that little girl has been through enough. Maybe we could work something out." "No more delays," Whitmore cut him off. "I have a reputation to protect. Either she comes with me now, or I'll have her charged with theft." Ellen looked at Sophie's tear-stained face and Abraham's helpless expression. She couldn't let her choices destroy this family. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll come with you." "Ellen, no." Abraham stepped forward, his voice breaking. "Don't do this. We'll find another way." "There is no other way," Ellen said, tears starting to fall. "I can't let you lose your home because of me." Sophie broke away from her father and threw herself into Ellen's arms. "Please don't leave us. I need you. Daddy needs you." Ellen held the sobbing child, her own heart breaking. She looked over Sophie's head at Abraham, seeing the love and desperation in his eyes that he'd never been able to voice. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "How very noble," Whitmore said sarcastically. "Get your things, Miss Mitchell. We have a wedding to attend." But as Ellen started toward the house to gather her few belongings, she heard more horses approaching. A group of riders emerged from the darkness, neighbors from town, including Mrs. Henderson, the store owner, and several ranch families. Mrs. Henderson dismounted and walked straight to Sheriff Wade. "Sheriff, we heard what was happening here. The whole town's talking about it." "Mrs. Henderson, this is a legal matter. This is about right and wrong," the elderly woman said firmly. "Ellen Mitchell has done nothing but help a sick man and his motherless child. If that's a crime, then we're all guilty." The store owner stepped forward. "We've been talking, Sheriff, about what's really important. This Whitmore fellow comes in here throwing money around, making threats. That's not how we do things." "Get out of my way," Whitmore snarled. "This doesn't concern you people. It concerns all of us," Mrs. Henderson replied. "Ellen, honey, you don't have to go anywhere you don't want to go." Ellen looked around at the faces surrounding her, people she barely knew, standing up for her and the Walsh family. Sophie was still clinging to her, and Abraham had moved closer, his presence steady and protective. "The debt," Ellen started to say. "We'll figure that out," the store owner said. "Communities take care of their own." Whitmore's face turned red with anger. "Sheriff, are you going to let this mob interfere with legal proceedings?" Sheriff Wade looked around at his neighbors, then at Sophie's hopeful face and Abraham's quiet dignity. "Mr. Whitmore, I think maybe you should head back to Millbrook. Let folks here sort this out amongst themselves." "This isn't over," Whitmore threatened, mounting his horse. "I'll be back with federal marshals if I have to. That woman belongs to me." As the angry man rode away with his companions, Ellen felt Sophie's grip loosen slightly. The little girl looked up at her with tear-filled but hopeful eyes. "Are you staying, Ellen?" Ellen looked around at the community that had rallied to support her, at Abraham, whose love shone in his eyes despite his inability to provide security, at Sophie, who needed her more than any contract or law could claim. "Yes, sweetheart," Ellen said, her voice strong with certainty. "I'm staying." 2 days later, Whitmore returned with federal marshals, just as he'd promised. Ellen watched from the kitchen window as the official government wagon rolled up to their house, her heart hammering against her ribs. This time, there would be no sympathetic local sheriff to help them. Marshal Thompson was a stern man with gray whiskers and hard eyes. He dismounted slowly, legal papers already in his hand. Behind him, Whitmore wore a satisfied smirk that made Ellen's stomach turn. "Miss Ellen Mitchell," the marshal called out in a voice that carried across the yard. "I'm here to escort you to face charges of contract fraud and theft. You need to come with me now." Abraham stepped out onto the porch, Sophie pressed close to his side. Marshall, surely we can discuss this reasonably. No discussion needed. Marshall Thompson replied firmly. Federal law is federal law. Miss Mitchell signed a legal contract, took payment, and failed to fulfill her obligations. That's theft, plain and simple. Ellen walked outside, her hands trembling but her chin held high. The neighbors who had supported her 2 nights ago were nowhere to be seen. When faced with federal authority, even the bravest hearts could waver. Marshall, she said quietly, I understand the law, but I'm asking you to understand the situation. This family needed help. That's not my concern. The marshal cut her off. My concern is the law. Mr. Whitmore has filed proper charges, and I'm here to enforce them. Whitmore stepped forward, his cold smile widening. Miss Mitchell, you've caused me considerable embarrassment and expense, but I'm still willing to honor our original agreement. Marry me today, and all charges will be dropped. Sophie burst into tears, hiding her face against her father's leg. Abraham's hands clenched into fists, but Ellen could see the helplessness in his eyes. What could one sick rancher do against federal marshals? And if I refuse? Ellen asked, though she already knew the answer. Then you'll face trial for theft, Whitmore said smoothly. Federal prison, most likely, and I'll still collect my debt from Mr. Walshier. Either way, I get satisfaction. Ellen closed her eyes, feeling trapped between impossible choices. Marry a cruel man who threatened children, or go to prison and watch Abraham lose everything. There has to be another way, Abraham said desperately. I'll work. I'll find the money somehow. With what? Whitmore laughed harshly. You're a dying man with a worthless ranch. Face reality, Walsh. He's not dying. Sophie shouted through her tears. Ellen made him better. She loves us. The marshal looked uncomfortable for the first time. Now, there's no call to upset the child. The child will learn to live with disappointment, Whitmore said coldly. Miss Mitchell, what's your decision? Marriage or prison? Ellen looked around desperately, hoping for another miracle like the community support from 2 nights ago. But the yard was empty except for their little family and their tormentors. Then she heard the sound of approaching horses. Her heart leaped, thinking the neighbors had come to help again. But instead of friendly faces, she saw more official riders, this time wearing different uniforms. The lead rider dismounted and approached Marshall Thompson. Marshall, I'm Judge Harrison from the Territorial Court. I understand you have a legal matter here that needs clarification. Whitmore frowned. Judge, this is a simple case of contract fraud. There's nothing to clarify. Judge Harrison was an older man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He looked around at the scene. The terrified child, the sick father trying to protect his family, and the young woman caught between impossible choices. Actually, Mr. Whitmore, there may be quite a bit to clarify. I've been investigating your business practices, and I have some questions about the legality of your contracts. What do you mean? Whitmore's confidence wavered slightly. Judge Harrison said firmly that forcing desperate women into marriage through financial coercion might not be as legal as you think. Miss Mitchell, how old were you when you signed this contract? 24, Your Honor, Ellen replied, confused but hopeful. And what were your circumstances at the time? Ellen glanced at Abraham, then back at the judge. I was homeless and starving, sir. My brother had died, and I had nowhere else to turn. Judge Harrison nodded grimly. And Mr. Whitmore, you knew this when you made your offer? I was providing an opportunity, Whitmore said defensively. Marriage, security, respectability. You were taking advantage of desperation, the judge corrected. Marshall Thompson, I need to examine these contracts before any arrests are made. But Your Honor, Whitmore protested. She took my money and ran off with another man. She provided nursing care to a sick neighbor. Judge Harrison said sternly. That's called Christian charity, Mr. Whitmore, not theft. Sophie had stopped crying and was watching the adults with wide, hopeful eyes. Abraham moved closer to Ellen, his presence steady and protective. Judge Harrison studied the legal papers for several long minutes, while everyone waited in tense silence. Finally, he looked up. Mr. Whitmore, these contracts are legally questionable at best. Miss Mitchell was clearly in duress when she signed, and you took advantage of her desperation. That invalidates the agreement. That's ridiculous. Whitmore sputtered. I have rights. You have the right to pursue this through proper legal channels, the judge said calmly. But you don't have the right to threaten and coerce. Miss Mitchell, you're free to make your own choice about marriage. No one can force you. Ellen felt tears of relief streaming down her face. Sophie squealed with joy and ran to hug her legs. Abraham's eyes met Ellen's over the child's head, and she saw everything he'd been afraid to say shining in his gaze. Your Honor, Ellen said, her voice steady now, I choose to stay here with the people who need me. Judge Harrison smiled. That's your right, Miss Mitchell. Marshal Thompson, there are no valid charges here. Mr. Whitmore, I suggest you find a bride who actually wants to marry you. As the officials prepared to leave, Whitmore made one last desperate attempt. This isn't over. I'll appeal this decision. That's your right, Judge Harrison said calmly. But I wouldn't recommend it. Coercing desperate women into marriage isn't a practice the territorial government wants to encourage. After the marshals and judge rode away, leaving a furious Whitmore to follow them, Ellen found herself alone in the yard with Abraham and Sophie. The crisis had passed, but now they faced a different kind of choice, what to do with their freedom. Ellen, Abraham said softly, you don't have to stay just because you're free to go. I want you to choose us because you want to, not because you have nowhere else to turn. Ellen looked at this man who had shown her such gentle strength, at the child who had taught her what it meant to be truly needed, and at the simple home that had become her sanctuary. Abraham, she said, taking his rough hands in hers, I'm not staying because I have to. I'm staying because I love you both, and this is where I belong. Sophie cheered and danced around them, while Abraham's eyes filled with tears of joy. The choice was finally, truly theirs to make. 1 week later, the little church in Millfield was packed with neighbors who had come to witness something extraordinary. Ellen stood at the front in a simple white dress that Mrs. Henderson had sewn for her, holding a bouquet of wildflowers that Sophie had picked that morning. Abraham waited beside her in his best shirt, clean-shaven and healthier than he'd looked in months. Sophie stood between them, wearing a yellow dress with ribbons in her hair, grinning so wide her face hurt. She clutched a basket of flower petals, ready to scatter them when Reverend Cole gave the signal. Dearly beloved, the Reverend began, his warm voice carrying to every corner of the small church. We gather today to witness the union of Ellen Mitchell and Abraham Walsh, and to welcome a new family into our community. Ellen looked out at the faces watching them. Mrs. Henderson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. The store owner nodded approvingly. Even Sheriff Wade had come, his hat in his hands and a gentle smile on his weathered face. These people had become her family too, she realized. They had stood up for her when she needed them most. Abraham, Reverend Cole, continued, do you take Ellen to be your wife, to love and cherish her in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live? Abraham's voice was strong and clear. I do, with all my heart. And Ellen, do you take Abraham to be your husband, to love and support him through whatever trials may come, for as long as you both shall live? Ellen looked into Abraham's warm brown eyes and saw her future there. Not the security she'd once thought she wanted, but something far better. Love, purpose, and a place where she truly belonged. I do, she said, her voice ringing with certainty. And Sophie, Reverend Cole said with a gentle smile, do you accept Ellen as your new mother, to love and obey her as part of your family? Sophie practically bounced with excitement. Yes, yes, I love Ellen so much. The congregation chuckled softly as Sophie scattered her flower petals everywhere, creating a carpet of yellow and white around the three of them. Then, by the power vested in me, Reverend Cole announced, I pronounce you husband and wife and declare Sophie officially part of this blessed family. Abraham, you may kiss your bride. Abraham's kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise for their future together. Sophie squealed with delight and threw her arms around both of them, and the church erupted in applause and cheers. As they walked down the aisle together, Ellen noticed a familiar figure in the back corner. The train conductor who had stopped at Millfield instead of Millbrook sat quietly, a knowing smile on his weathered face. After the ceremony, while the neighbors gathered for cake and celebration in the churchyard, Ellen approached him. "Excuse me," she said. "Weren't you the conductor on my train last week?" The old man's eyes twinkled. "Yes, miss, or should I say, Mrs. Walsh now. I never did understand how I ended up in Millfield instead of Millbrook. Was it really an accident?" The conductor chuckled and glanced toward Abraham, who was lifting Sophie onto his shoulders while she giggled with pure joy. "Well now, Mrs. Walsh, sometimes the good Lord works in mysterious ways. I've been conducting trains for 30 years, and I've learned to recognize when someone's running toward the wrong life and when they need a push toward the right one." Ellen stared at him in amazement. "You stopped at Millfield on purpose?" "Let's just say I had a feeling that little Sophie's prayers were about to be answered," he said with a wink. "Sometimes the wrong station turns out to be exactly where you're supposed to be." Before Ellen could respond, Abraham approached with Sophie still perched on his shoulders. "Ellen," he said, "Sophie wants to know if we can go home now so she can show you the surprise she's been working on." "What surprise?" Ellen asked, looking up at the beaming child. "I made you a present," Sophie announced proudly. "I've been practicing my letters, and I wrote you a story about how you came to save us." Ellen's heart swelled with love for this little girl who had first called her an angel. "I can't wait to read it, sweetheart." As they walked home together, Abraham carrying Sophie, Ellen's hand tucked securely in his free arm, Ellen thought about the journey that had brought her here. She'd started as a desperate woman running toward what she thought was security, but she'd found something infinitely better. 6 months later, the ranch was thriving. Abraham's health had continued to improve under Ellen's loving care, and Sophie was reading entire books by herself. They'd added chickens to their small farm and planted a vegetable garden that was the envy of the county. One sunny afternoon, Ellen was hanging laundry when she heard the familiar whistle of the westbound train. She watched it pull into the station and saw a young woman step off, looking confused and lost. Without hesitation, Ellen dried her hands on her apron and walked toward town. She found the woman standing on the platform with a suitcase, tears in her eyes. "Excuse me," Ellen said gently. "Are you all right? You look like you might be lost." The woman looked up gratefully. "I was supposed to go to Millbrook, but this is Millfield. I don't know what to do." Ellen smiled, remembering her own confusion and fear on this same platform not so long ago. "Well," she said, "sometimes the wrong station turns out to be exactly where you need to be. Why don't you come have some coffee with me, and we'll figure out what's best for you." As they walked away from the station together, Sophie came running from the house, her face bright with excitement. "Ellen, is this lady lost too? Can we help her like you helped us?" Ellen laughed and caught Sophie up in a hug. "Yes, sweetheart. I think maybe we can help her find exactly where she belongs." The train whistle echoed across the prairie as it continued toward Millbrook, but Ellen knew with absolute certainty that she was already home. Sometimes the greatest adventures begin with taking the wrong turn, and sometimes the wrong station is really the right destination all along.